Good afternoon and welcome to an Ethical Corporation webinar on transitioning to a circular economy. I'm Candy Telani-Anton, Head of Europe at Ethical Corporation. We'll wait a couple of minutes until the entire audience is connected and we'll start the webinar. Good afternoon again, and really welcome to our webinar on transitioning to a circular economy. Again, my name is Candy Telani-Anton. I head of Europe at Ethical Corporation. So today's topic is a very relevant one currently. Increasingly, businesses are realizing that small sustainable impacts are no longer enough. We need a seismic shift in how we do business, and a significant change that is gaining momentum is transitioning to a circular economy strategy. Circular economy will be extensively covered in this year's Responsible Business Summit in Europe. We are hosting a number of pre-event forum, workshops, and sessions at the event focused on providing new ideas and strategies around driving to such a strategy. As part of the knowledge exchange in the build-up to this year's event, we are excited to host today's webinar with 4 great minds who will share their ideas, strategies, and learning in how transitioning from a linear to a circular economy. Today, joining us, we have Lorraine Francourt, Director Chemicals Management and Circular Economy, the Dow Chemical Company; Brendan Edgerton, Director Circular Economy, at World Business Council Sustainable Development; Louise, Koch, Corporate Sustainability Director, Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Dell, and the session will be moderated by Samantha Veide, Associate Director, USA. For Forum for the Future. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Sam to get the discussion underway. To you, Sam.
Thank you, Candy. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. As Candy said, my name is Samantha Veide, and I am the Associate Director for the United States for Forum for the Future. We are a global NGO seeking to catalyze system change to address the world's most pressing sustainability challenges, including the circular economy. And delighted to have this conversation with everyone today, and delighted to be joined by Louise, Lorraine, and Brendan. So let me just kind of preview for everyone online the way that we're going to run the conversation today, and then we will go ahead and dive in. So I will do a very brief context setting, and then we will turn it over to our 3 panelists to walk through what they're doing within their organizations to address the waste crisis in our society and bring circular solutions to light. And each of them will speak for a short period of time, and then we would like to hold a large majority of the time, the back half of the hour, 20 minutes, to do some Q&A. So we ask that during the session, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window, and then toward the end of the call, we will be going through those questions and then posing them to particular panelists. So if you have a general question, just drop that in the chat window. If you have a question for a particular panelist, feel free to direct that to them in the chat window, and I'll make sure to pose it to the appropriate person. Great. So as Candy mentioned, the current waste crisis is hard to ignore these days. And whether you turn on the TV, engage in social media, or depending on where you live, maybe when you open the front door, it is a situation and a crisis that is front and center. In the US at least, I don't know how many of our participants are sitting in the US right now, but to me, this current awareness around the waste crisis is somewhat oddly, but interestingly, kind of illustrated in the current campaign against the simple plastic straw. And we might get to this in this conversation, but I personally can't decide if the plastic straw is a distraction to some of the more systemic issues that we have going on, or is it a sign of an awakening, potentially from folks that might have before ignored this crisis. So we will potentially pose this question to our panelists later today. Is the plastic straw a distraction or an environmental awakening? But before we get into that, we all know the current data points. So the Chinese government's decision to ban mixed plastic and mixed paper recycling back in 2017 has sent recycling markets into a tailspin. And we are increasingly realizing that just because something is recyclable does not mean that it gets recycled. Combined with our addiction to convenience, our over-reliance on single-use plastics is creating quite an awareness on the proliferation of plastics in our environment. Estimates show that 83% of the world's drinking water today contains plastic fiber, and we, on average, put 8 million tons of plastic into our oceans each year. We are also normalizing a degenerative food system that is rife with waste, and this is alarmingly juxtaposed with the looming reality that we are going to need to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Of course, all of this is also against the backdrop of the fact that many of us work in organizations where packaging is necessary. It is a way to meet customer needs. It is a way to keep products safe. It is a way to keep food fresh. And so we have kind of an interesting relationship with packaging and our waste economy. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist. And panelists, I ask that you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself before getting into your content, and then to go ahead into your content. So our first presenter today is Brendan Edgerton of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Brendan?
Very good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Brendan.
Okay, excellent. Okay, excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Edgerton, Director for the Circular Economy Program at WBCSD. I've been with the organization for a little over 3 years at this point, working in circular economy over that time, and have seen the concept grow quite rapidly in interest and commitment from the different companies across our 200 member organization, and the level of seriousness and progressiveness that the companies have demonstrated and how far they want to take this concept from one that originally started as one that was of interest due to corporate sustainability measures to more and more today seeing circular economy integrate into our member companies' core corporate strategy, and looking at how they can not only do better but do well at the same time by taking this perspective. So happy to be part of this conversation today, and looking forward to sharing a little bit more of what we're doing at WBCSD on the topic. So let's see, Samantha, could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, excellent. So perfect. So what we're showing here is the journey that the companies have been on with respect to circular economy at WBCSD. It started from the very beginning on the left side of helping companies understand what is the circular economy. And so we released a CEO guide back in 2017 with over half a dozen, or with over a dozen companies, beginning to put shared or common narrative around circular economy from the perspective of business, and outlining the 5 business models with the support of Accenture around circular economy. What are the opportunities in it? What are the potential risks of not moving towards a circular economy? And put that into a relatively brief, mostly visual document that begins to give companies the tools that they need in order to communicate this concept effectively with leadership. And as time went on, companies moved past, they began to understand what the circular economy is, and in particular, what circular economy means for their business. And the next question then was to think about what is the business case itself. And ultimately, how do we get started? And so you see the resources across the top, all of which are available at WBCSD.org for you to take a look at, where we begin to articulate, the business case when it comes to environmental priorities, when it comes to the 8 business cases that we've identified across the companies that we work with on why they're moving towards circularity, and then understanding the risks in not doing so in a joint publication we did with KPMG, PGGM, EBRD, and some other organizations there. Ultimately, providing some resources for how companies can get started, and then getting into deeper conversations around specific value chains, whether that's the electronics or the built environment, looking at policy, or even the ocean waste conversation, going back to 2017, pulling some resources together for allowing companies to understand, what options they have when moving towards circularity, what's the driver for them to do so, and ultimately leads to our program that we have today, which, Samantha, if we can go to the next slide. At WBCSD, we have 6 programs that we offer. So circular economy is just one of the offerings that we have, and we adopted it officially as the 6th program back in October of last year. But that there was quite a bit of lead up in the work that we were doing with our member companies before that. But it just goes to show how much the concept has grown within membership and has become such a priority for so many that it was essential to make it one of the core programs we offer. And within the circular economy program, we have Factor 10, which is our flagship circular economy project. And it encompasses the 6 different work streams on the right-hand side of the slide that you'll see. So with around 40 companies now from 16 different industries and representing over 1.4 trillion in annual turnover, we're working with those 40 companies across these 6 work streams. And the first, and certainly the most popular work stream today, is on circular metrics. So you probably heard there's a number of these initiatives that are going on today, each with its own objective and intended audiences. What we're working on with our member companies is a way to establish a common way for companies to measure their circularity and to be able to do so at the company or business unit level. The idea behind this, the interest behind this is to drive internal business decision making, to allow the leaders within the company to understand where they are with respect to circular economy today, and what are the risks and opportunities that they have based on that position, and knowing what levers are on the table for them to use in order to improve their overall circularity. So we've released within our membership, we released a draft and have had over a dozen companies pilot test that initial draft and come back with some good feedback and input for us to update. And we are aiming to release a public version for comment around middle of this year. So stay tuned for that. But we would be keen to get all the feedback and input from everyone on the call here to provide your opinions and recommendations for how it could be improved. So that's the first and definitely one of the more popular work streams. We're also working on policy, where we're updating our circular economy policy brief, outlining various national policies that we've identified globally, and taking it a step further and understanding what are the business implications for that, what are the implications to specific industries. Are those policies more regulatory or more of a framework providing direction? And so we'll be updating that with new policies that have surfaced from other geographies as well later on this year. But one of the other interesting projects that we have on the docket is looking at what are the circular economy policies that are effectively accelerating circular economy activities. So we've heard quite a bit about what's not working, what are the policy barriers that companies are facing. Instead, I think we wanted to change the conversation to what is working and how can we begin to scale those types of policies. So with that, I mean, we have 4 other work streams within Factor 10 on the automotive sector, on bioeconomy, which is just getting started, on the built environment, and then on e-waste that is also in early stages right now. But it is a very exciting initiative. As I mentioned, many companies involved and many industries, which is even more important and more valuable in what we're doing. As you can see, the circular economy touches on all different industries. So maybe I'll stop there and hand it back over to Samantha, the next speaker.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. And just as a reminder to everyone, if you have some questions that came up after hearing Brendan speak, please go ahead and put those in the chat window. Okay, fantastic. I will now turn it over to our second panelist, which is Louise Koch from Dell.
Thank you very much, Sam, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon in sunny Europe. So it's a pleasure for me to take you through the journey of our transition to a more and more circular economy and circular business model within Dell Technologies. So to start with an overview on the next slide here, please. This is really how we design and think products, driving sustainable innovation at every step of the way, every step of the life cycle of our products. So starting with design, looking at modular design, for example, that enables easier repair, upgradability, recyclability, using lots of recycled materials and recyclable materials, of course. I will dive into that in a moment. So really keeping in mind that the products are designed for a circular economy in many ways. In the building, in the production here. So that's also working with our suppliers to minimize their footprint in terms of water and energy, which you can say is part or is not part of the circular economy, but is for sure a very important piece of the overall footprint of our products. And here, of course, also protecting human rights and workers in our supply chain, but that's a different topic. In terms of the shipment and the packaging, so packaging is one of those growing waste streams as well, that we seem to be overloading everything with packaging these days. Our journey towards our goal of 100% waste-free packaging in 2020 actually started more than 10 years ago, where we saw an increasing focus and concern from our customers about the amount of packaging that were being used and what to do with it. So we were some of the first in the industry to really start this journey. Started using bamboo in our packaging instead of plastics, for example, several years ago, almost 10 years ago now. We have been using wheat straw, mushroom-based packaging as well. Using lots and lots of recycled cardboard, recycled paper. So today, more than 95% of our packaging is made from renewable, recycled, and recyclable or even compostable materials. And of course, working towards that 100%. For the use, it's really the energy efficiency that's enabling you, our customers, everybody to get more done with less energy consumption. And of course, also to look at how can you as a user as a customer optimize the circularity. And another option here is, of course, also to go for a PC or IT data center as a service model, so the leasing model, which actually enables us to keep the ownership of the equipment and therefore also have the full control of optimizing performance and sustainability throughout the life cycle. And then last but not least, we don't talk about end of life. First of all, we talk about end of use, because if a customer has been using a Dell laptop or a data center, but let's stick with the laptop, it's easier. For let's say 3 or 4 years, there's still plenty of life back in remaining in that piece of equipment. So we're actually running the world's largest take back, reuse and recycling program in electronics, offering these services to customers in 75 countries around the world. And we help customers to, first of all, wipe for data, of course, very importantly these days. And then the equipment will be refurbished and resold if the customer wants that on the secondhand market, to give it a second life and actually bring back a surplus value to the customer. Or donate it to charity if that is the wish of the customer, or recycled if it is game over, but with full traceability, of course. So that's the overview of the life cycle here. Now, on the next slide, diving a little bit more into our work with recycled materials, which is showing the very circular aspect here of the circular economy. And important to notice here that there are many loops here. It's not only the closed loop. We started out with the post-consumer recycled plastics back in 2008. We've been using that in our displays, in our PCs for more than 10 years now. Lots of old water bottles and CD cases going in there. Actually, we've just met our 2020 goal. We met that this year, of using 100 million pounds of recycled materials in our products. So that is around 45,000 metric tons of recycled materials, starting with the consumer plastics. Then moving on in 2014, to start the industry first closed loop plastics program, actually taking plastics from old electronic equipment that we get in from our Take Back program, take that plastic and process it and recycle it, reuse it in products that are shipping around the world. So in more than 100 of our product models, you will find closed loop plastics as well. Then recycled carbon fiber, an example of taking a waste product from another industry, here the aerospace industry, and using that in our Latitude laptops so far, also expanding that program. Jumping to the closed loop program that we launched last year, taking not only plastics but also precious metals like gold, and again in a closed loop process, recycling, reusing in new equipment. And then last but not least, another darling of mine, our work with the ocean-bound plastics packaging, where we've started using plastics collected in coastal areas and waterways. So collecting it, catching it before it enters the ocean, before it does the damage, and while it still has a quality that it can be used as a material. So we've committed to using 80 tons per year in 2025, and we are well on the way to doing that. And on the last slide, because circular economy, or the challenges in moving towards circular economy, are in so many ways systemic challenges, and it needs systemic solutions, and it needs partnerships. So taking just one example here with the ocean plastics, as you know, 8 million tons of plastic enter our oceans each year. That is a huge number, and much more than we, even as a global company, can solve. So 1.5 years ago, we founded the Next Wave Consortium together with the Next Lonely Planet NGO, and together with 7 other founding companies, including General Motors, Herman Miller, and Interface. And we were happy that last year IKEA and HP decided to join Next Wave as well. And we have more large companies probably joining us within the coming months here. So what we do here is that is a joint commitment between all these companies to, first of all, reduce the amount of plastics that we all use in products and packaging, and then to find innovative ways or practical ways, whatever, of using ocean-bound plastic in products and packaging. And these companies actually sharing technologies and innovations amongst themselves. And in doing so, create a market demand and together build the world's first commercially viable and therefore scalable supply chain for collecting, processing ocean-bound plastic and bringing it back into the economy as a valuable resource. So this is what the Next Wave Partnership is about. And by the way, you can hear more about that at the Responsible Business Summit in London in June. So small commercial here. So that is it from my side. Thank you for listening in here. And back over to you, Sam.
Louise, before you sign off, I just want to clarify one point that I might want to get into later. Did you say that Dell has committed to waste-free packaging?
Yes, and by that we mean made from renewable, recyclable materials. So obviously
Gotcha.
we are where there is probably no such thing as waste-free, but fully recyclable.
Great, perfect. Okay, thank you, Louise. I will now turn it over to our final panelist, which is Lorraine Francourt from the Dell Chemical Company. Lorraine?
Thank you, Samantha, and hello to everybody. Yes, my name's Lorraine, and I'm working for Dow in the European headquarters, which is just outside of Zurich. And I'm a sustainability professional of many decades, and my current focus right now really is in this area of circular economy. Dow, as many of you probably know already, is a major global producer of chemicals and plastics. And I just want to start by saying something that's very personal to me, but also I know personal to everybody who works in our plastic business and in the company, and that is plastics does not belong in the environment. And we salute all the work that's going on to make that something of the past. And we ourselves are working very actively on many fronts, not smallest of which is the Alliance to End Plastics Waste, which I could say a few things about maybe in the Q&A if we get to that. But look it up online, and endplasticswaste.org. So Dow has been on a sustainability journey, for a long time, and certainly I was around in 1995 when we started our first set of sustainability goals. But as we completed those and went through to our next set over the next decade, there was a growing realization that managing our site and also our products from a sustainability viewpoint, i.e. their footprint, and then the handprint, it's very vital, but it's not enough. So when we set our goals in 2015, our next set of sustainability goals for the corporation, we basically looked at ways in which we would change the role of business in society. And transitioning to a more circular economy is a really big part of that. The resource availability that we have as a human species, our quality of life, if we want to keep that the way we have it, and also bring more and more people up into that level of quality of life, it really is something that we need to do differently. So what does that mean? So we said that we would work as part of our goal to deliver major circular economy projects. And we left it fairly vague at that point, but we're very active with Brendan's team in looking at metrics for that very reason. Because although we realize that indeed partnering with other people is a key part of this, to deliver projects, working in ways that we've never worked before to deliver these circular solutions. How do we measure that? And how do we show ourselves, our partners, and the world that we're actually making progress? So that's something we're working on very hard. In a linear economy, which, let's face it, no one set out to exactly design, which we're living through this unintentional consequences now. We've all seen those lines where it says substance goes to a product, and that product then goes to waste, and then according to our safety data sheets or our product manuals, they are taken care of by a local responsible waste management company. And obviously that isn't happening around the world. So as we move to a circular mindset, we need to look at the infrastructure in which will be needed to make that happen. because that doesn't exist in all countries, probably not enough in any country today, to make sure that instead of going to waste, that actual end of life or end of service product, it isn't the end. That in fact that becomes a resource for something else of value to society, and it's maintained in circulation. So that's one area in which we're focusing. That takes a lot of innovation. Probably don't need to say that to this audience, but clearly, as we look at the type of innovation that needs, we're looking at innovation that's really partly in our sites, partly in how we work to design our products, but very much with partners. How do we design the performance, the technical qualities that are needed for the product in question? Because whatever it is we do in moving to a circular economy, we do actually need the same technical and attractiveness of all the products that are placed onto the market. And we all want to have the same quality of products or better quality as we're moving forward. So we would be working with our partners on that, and then thinking of things that probably we never were thinking of before, which also requires a kind of innovation mindset, and that's how to do better collection and sorting, and of course the whole issue of recycling and different types of recycling. And then there's no point collecting and recovering materials if we can't find these attractive applications and market for them. This has to be in balance. The circle is a perfectly balanced entity. So at the end of the day, you know, all of the things that we place on the market, we want to make sure that they're practical and also their social benefits, if you like, are matched by their environmental performance, whatever part of the circle you're looking in fact. A large part of what we do, just to wrap up as well on this, is education. When I started working on this, when we set our 2015 goal, circular economy wasn't something that a lot of people were really talking about. Maybe they were talking about cradle to cradle, something like that. So it wasn't a completely new concept, far from it. But in the business world, we had to do quite a lot of education and awareness. Since then, I'm happy to say that things have absolutely really grown phenomenally fast, and people really realize what this is, and they're very excited about this challenge. And then finally, maybe we are aware that as part of moving forward, some other things have to be done to actually clean up from what's been done in the past. So that's part of our circular mindset as well. Samantha, those are my comments. I'm happy to hand the floor back to you.
Samantha?
Hello. Sorry, Candy. I was just saying,
okay.
Thanks, Lorraine, and we will now transition into our question and answer portion of the webinar. So while we've already had some great questions come in that I'll be posing to our panelists, I'll ask other folks, if you have questions now, go ahead and put them in the chat window. And while you're doing that, I am going to quickly pose the question I put forth at the beginning of this webinar to each of our panelists. So this new fascination with plastic straws, the much maligned plastic straw, is this a distraction from wider issues, or is this a sign of an environmental awakening? Louise, I will start with you.
Thank you. I think it is both. So we should for sure not kid ourselves and think that if we stop using plastic straws, we are doing our part to change the world. But on the other hand, I do think it's a positive sign of, and I really see that with people around me. I'm based in Copenhagen, but travel a lot around Europe and beyond. And I do see a very clear awakening and awareness that, hey, we need to change this. And if you buy a plastic bottle these days, people look at you a little bit like, should you be doing that? So I think it's more a matter of kind of channeling that energy and that ambition to do the right thing into more impactful changes on the big scale and on the small scale in our everyday lives.
Excellent. Thank you, Louise. It's interesting to think. I wonder if, I don't know if Brendan or Lorraine, it doesn't sound like Lorraine is based in the States. I don't know where you're based, Brendan, but if that would be a similar narrative here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Lorraine, yeah, go ahead, Brendan.
wasn't sure if you were opening that up, but I'm actually based in Geneva, however, in the States today, originally from the States. So, actually in conversations with friends and family, I mean, the straw comes up as, one of the first items of the conversation when talking about plastic waste and reducing what could be unnecessary. But I would agree with Louise that it is in that it is kind of the beginning or first step of something much bigger. I think even if it is just the straw, it gets people thinking about what other uses of plastics do I have, particularly single use, and which ones might I not need, or how could they reduce or how could they reuse. And the straw is often the first item of discussion leading to that other one.
Yeah, this is Lorraine. If I can just, can I just jump in there? I agree with the other two speakers, and I think that, straws, obviously, we all know they're a very small percentage of the waste. They were found they're found in pickups that many of us participate in our cleanups with our teams, etc. We find straws. To me, they also serve to illustrate our throwaway culture. And I think as we look at circular economy, and the fact that there's a material issue, but there's also a behavior issue. There's a kind of, I'll put it quite emotionally, kind of lack of respect sometimes for what we do with what we've used in our life and how we treat, the world's resources. So I think that if they've served to illustrate that, and then, obviously the impacts that this is having on the environment, they're very, very very, very visual. I think that if you go to bans of things as a knee-jerk reaction, it doesn't help to solve issues. And therefore, I totally agree that we shouldn't use more materials than we should use. And honestly, who really needs a straw apart from some people who do have actually a need because they have some kind of disability or something, or they're maybe 5 years old. But it's the idea of solving an issue rather than going directly to, well, we just have to get rid of that. I don't think that's the solution. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lorraine. And while you're unmuted, I'm actually going to pose a question to you. So you got at this a little bit in the response that you just gave to us, but what do you say to the critics that think circular design and thinking can't alone tackle the strain we're putting on planetary boundaries? That the real issue, quote unquote, is not a linear approach to manufacturing, but the normalization of excessive consumption and consumerism in many cultures.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I'm going to try and answer a little bit carefully, because on one hand, the quality of life, as we all know, is improved around the world, thankfully, right, through innovation and technology. And who am I to tell people what they should and shouldn't do in their lifestyle, in a way, right, if they're not endangering anybody else? But however, what I can say very clearly is that, with more and more people in the world, higher living standards, we do need this different thinking, right? And so we're going to have a different aspects needed to get to this solution around the world. And I think in Dell, we believe that circular design and thinking, it brings in some of those common sense, but also new ways of working, and that we fully embrace. So I've mentioned working with a systemic mindset, right? Don't optimize in one area to have then a negative effect somewhere else. Connect all the parts of the value chain or system. Look at things with a life cycle perspective, right? Before we talk circular, we look to talk about life cycle a lot, and we still need to do that. Get everyone to the table. I think the Dell example was a great one of getting partners to a table in ways that we've never done before. We also do that with our alliance. And, ultimately, we've been too relaxed about what has going to waste. And interestingly, we haven't done that at our own site. At our own site, we've had fantastic results over decades to eliminate waste and use a byproduct from one part of the site as a raw material for another part of the site. So now we're going to put that experience to work with others. So just to summarize, I do understand why the critique is made. And one of the reasons I think is because we all want a solution and we want it very fast. But I think that the power of circular design and action is actually going to create solutions that will stand the test of time. What we do now won't be seen in the future as just some reaction and make things look a bit better. We actually need to create those long-lasting and durable solutions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lorraine. And I'm actually going to pose a question to you now, Louise, that came in from the folks online, which is also related a bit to this question of increasing consumption. So the question is, to what extent is your organization looking at alternative sources of value creation in order to generate growth that is not predicated on ever-increasing consumption? For example, there are some interesting efforts, example IKEA, where they are beginning to challenge the idea of quote-unquote ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so as I was just shortly mentioning in my overview, we are more and more also looking at offering, and we've done for several years, offering a PC as a service, IT as a service. So not selling the product in classical ownership model, but exactly providing the service, just like IKEA is looking into as well. So that is one of the examples. We've actually found quite a few barriers in customer mindsets and organizational setup to embrace that. Because if you go to many organizations, whether public or corporate, the IT department might have their IT procurement budget that they want to spend. They want to own that equipment, and they might also be afraid that if they transition to a service agreement, that they might be out of a job. That's obviously not the case. That would actually give them time to look at the more important digital transformation tasks that they would have in a company. So in short, IT as a service, being it laptops, data centers, storage, infrastructure, we provide everything in this company. And then yes, we are indeed looking into that. We also have really interesting examples and more of those as well of digital solutions driving circular economy and resource efficiency. One really good example is using IoT, kind of a layer of Internet of Things intelligence in the cold chains of supermarkets, where we've been working with one of the large supermarket chains in the UK, and actually enabling them to cut down the food waste by almost 50%, because they have more intelligent refrigeration, and because they're able to monitor and repair ahead of time if there's any challenges. And by the way, also saving huge amounts of energy. So they're both sides of digital, both of course also using your equipment for longer. That's why we design our equipment for repairability and offer service and support for our customers as well. So many things that we are doing. But of course, you're very right. Digital transformation is also about a lot of hardware that we're all using. So it's a combination, also back to the question from before, it's a combination of really designing for recyclability, planning for recyclability, and at the same time looking at how can you disconnect consumption with hardware.
Great. Thank you, Louise. I am going to pivot a little bit here to address some other questions beyond consumption that came in from the group online. But before I do that, I just want to see if Louise, Lorraine, or Brendan have anything to add on this initial discussion we're having around consumerism and consumption and alternative business models.
Not specifically from my side, Sam.
Okay, great. Well, then I will pose another question that came in. This person is interested in hearing how businesses are dealing with or considering dealing with the presence of potentially toxic chemicals in recycled products as we transition to a circular economy. Does anyone have a particular desire to answer that? If not, I think I'll lob it to you, Lorraine.
I was unmuting myself in anticipation of that happening. Yeah, so I think this is a very important question, and we're working very hard. One of the things in my job title, my very long job title, talks about chemicals management policy, actually. And this comes up a lot now because of the move to use final end-of-life products, end-of-service products, whatever, essentially looking at using them as a resource, right? So if we're going to use them as a resource, at the end of the day, they become raw materials in some way or the other, and they move into the cycle again. There are ways of making sure that, this really comes back down to design, right? And first of all, I want to say that the reasons that products are what they are is constantly being looked at, what products are used. And I'm speaking generally now, speaking for Dow, but also speaking across the different working groups that we're engaged with our customers and with other partners. So you're always looking for some kind of technical performance, right? Whether that's flame retardancy or some sort of durability or something like even a color, right? You're looking at things that make the product what it is. And throughout the years, the products that have been used have changed depending on our knowledge and the data that we've had on those products. So now what we find ourselves today is a very interesting kind of fork in the road, because on one hand, we've got products which have been in commerce maybe for many years, back when certain materials were used are now no longer used today. And yet we don't want to see them going into an uncontrolled waste situation of any kind, be that the marine environment or any other part of the environment, or being incinerated badly and causing some kind of toxicity. And then you've got materials that we're making tomorrow, right? And many companies are looking at this, deciding what products they're going to use. And I think the crux of this is back to, and I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but to think about this in a very holistic way. Why is the product there? Why does it need to be there? If it doesn't need to be there, then by all means it should be removed. If it needs to be there because it's performing a technical solution and there is no other alternative, then obviously there's some choices. But ultimately, the end of first life, call it that way, has to be treated differently. And we think there are some recycling methods, so for example, chemical recycling, which can actually handle these types of materials in a way that there is no exposure and there's no danger to humans or the environment. So ultimately, it's about looking at this, a very geeky, nerdy way, and how to handle this in a systems approach. I hope that at least partly answers the question.
Great. Okay, thank you, Lorraine. And I'm going to move to another question here for Brendan. And again, kind of changing tacks a little bit here. So this person wants to know, ISO has started a new technical committee on the circular economy. What are your thoughts on this? Is there a value add in this? Is WBCSD involved? And do you think they should be if they're not?
Great. No, very good question. Yeah, I mean, ISO is one of the groups that we know is involved in the metric space. We know Underwriters Laboratory, BSI. There's a handful of organizations that are looking at this right now, including national governments actually as well. So it is quite a crowded space, but I think, at the same time, because there are still relatively few um, metrics conversations that are developing right now, that we are in regular contact with each other. So with UL, with the ISO conversation, in particular through our global network partner in France, EPE. So I think we're just trying to, one, keep each other up to date, and then also see how we could support each other in the various initiatives and making sure that they're complementary. We've done this to a good extent with UL. But I think the other conversation is one that we had in the beginning of our metrics work is, what are we doing this for? Who's going to use it, and why is it going to change the behavior towards circularity? And in doing so, we were able to hone in, obviously, quite quickly on the private sector, and looking at leadership within companies, and developing a metric that'll mean something to CEOs and leaders within the companies. But I think, as far as whether there's a need for a standard on circularity, it's we, in the beginning, when we did our landscape analysis early last year, found that there wasn't too much appetite with the audience that we were looking at for a standard. It was more of a way to ensure that there's consistency in how they're thinking about it, and to be sure that if they're looking at calculating something some way, that they're able to have a conversation with someone else, and that will be understood. So it's not so much for reporting or external communications, what we're doing, as much as it's made to give a consistent structure for how to think about it within a company. So I think that for the most part, that's where companies are today, in thinking about how do they improve their overall business, more so than communicating about a score or anything like that. So in that way, it's hard to say what the value would be for a standard on that conversation, but there's a different audience for each one of these exercises, and obviously we have our audience and intended users with the private sector in mind here as we build our metrics.
Great. And I'm watching the clock here, and I see that we have 5 minutes left. Brendan, I have one more quick question for you that came in. And then I have one more question that I'll throw out to the entire group. And then I think we have a quick closing question as well. So I'm going to try to squeeze in 3 more audience questions in our next 5 minutes here. So Brendan, another question that came in said, we're all focusing a lot on plastics. And isn't the circular economy about more than plastics? Can you comment on that?
Yes, it certainly is. And to Louise brought it up earlier, the water and energy component is a critical. Those are critical elements to consider also within circular economy. So, within our metrics work, we are talking. The conversation transcends much more than just plastics. It's all materials, as well as looking at water and energy. So that I would fully agree with that. Maybe I'll just keep it at that level now to get your other questions in.
Great. Yeah, and I just I want to just a good shout out to the person who put that forth. I think that's a really good call, as plastics are really top of mind right now, I think, because a lot of media attention, but of course a circular mindset is looking at regenerative agriculture practices, thinking about other packaging beyond plastic. So I think it is food waste, which I think sometimes gets forgotten in this conversation. So okay, so this to anyone on the panel who'd like to reply, and I'm super interested in hearing this perspective, what is the panel's view on quote unquote biodegradable plastics? Is this a valuable way forward, and is there a place for this material in the circular economy?
Okay, let me jump in on there if I can. I'm happy to hear from the other panelists as well. This is one of those things that I was kind of referring to in my comments about everyone wants the solution fast, right? And here we are back talking about plastics again. And can I just say I totally support the other comments about the circular is big. I mean, circular is everything at the end of the day, right? It's how we utilize resources in every aspect of what we do on a daily basis, and how we rethink, redesign, all of that. The biodegradable thing came up because there's this wish, to do something fast, and the idea that surely that sounds like it's very close to nature and that will just like disappear in the environment. And a couple of things are that really, first of all, doesn't disappear very fast. And secondly, it can encourage people back to this idea of behavior systems and the thinking that we need, just to think, well, this is biodegradable, so I'll just keep throwing it away. Final point, if biodegradable gets into other types of plastic in the recycle stream, it can actually make that stream very difficult to recycle and reuse. So whilst it might have some niche applications, I'm not saying never use it, and there's going to be some niche applications, I'm sure. Using it as an overall solution is, in our opinion, not the way to go.
Great. Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, so the final question that came in, and I apologize, there were a lot of great questions. We weren't quite able to get to them all, but I think this is a good one to close us out. So I'll ask everyone to do every panelist to do a quick answer of this, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Candy, to close us out. So the question is, considering that the transition towards the circular economy is huge, it takes time, resources, and a heck of a lot of change, what would be, from your experience, the top practice or top tip, top thing you think we need to tackle this challenge? And I'll just go right down the line here. Louise.
So I think it's connect the dots. So the industry is doing quite a lot to design recyclable products and packaging. A big missing link is in the recycling industry. So if you want to change the world, go change the recycling industry to become fully circular.
Awesome. Great. Lorraine?
Make the value of materials at their end of life such that it makes sense to reuse them again. Keep the value at the end of life.
Keep the value at the end of life. Great. And Brendan, bring us home.
All right. Well, there's quite a few. I think the one that comes to mind first, though, is finance and accounting. That's going to a circular business model is going to change how projects and initiatives and products are financed, where the risk and responsibility for those projects is held. And even looking at the accounting system of linear depreciation and impairment and how those are kind of reinforcing the current linear system. There needs to be a deeper conversation around finance and accounting and how a circular economy will draw on those industries to change, and likewise how they can drive circularity even quicker.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I certainly enjoyed the conversation today and certainly got my brain thinking early on this Thursday morning. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And again, I'll turn it over to Candy at the Ethical Corporation to bring us to a close.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and thank you very much to all our speakers, Lorraine, Brendan, and Louise. It's been an excellent discussion, and it's really a shame that we just had an hour, but it's been amazing, and the amount of question we have received is really big. So everyone who signed up to the webinar will receive a recording of today's webinar within the next week. If your question weren't answered, you can raise this with our speakers and 600 heads of business at this year's Responsible Business Summit Europe, taking place on the 10th to the 12th of June in London. So please visit eventsethicalcorporation.com, RBS, for the full speaker lineup and agenda. Do get in touch with me or my colleague Brenda and the team if you would like to learn more about the event. And finally, thank you to the speakers for sparing the time to share their work in this exciting space. And thank you to you all for joining us today. Thank you very much and all the best.